League of Legends as an esport is a very team-oriented game, and as such, it's very difficult to look good on a bad team. It's one of the hardest things to do, but it has massive repercussions on your career if you can't pull it off, because suddenly then teams won't want to have you for, the next iteration of the split for, another roster, maybe on a different team or on the same team. And I think this is largely due to poor scouting, first of all, from the teams and organizations. And this even becomes more crucial when we're talking about North America, at least, because, of course, we have the smaller player base and everything. But on top of that, maybe then you should have a better scouting area or group in your organization that is dedicated to that specific task. But instead, no, we just have shitty scouting in North America as well as in Europe. I think it's at a higher level, but I don't think it's reached its peak in terms of being able to scout talent. And I also think that analysis is part of the major problem as to why looking good in a bad team is very difficult, because a lot of the analysis that we actually see at the forefront is from the Riot broadcast, and they really don't do a good job of pointing out the certain well-oiled parts of the machine and the other parts which are just destroying the entire team. And so there is no real distinction between these two pieces. And I don't entirely blame the broadcast, because of course they have to speak more in generalities because they want to reach a larger audience, but they still are a contributor to being part of the problem of propagating this false narrative that a entire team is bad rather than just specific parts are bad, and maybe there are actually some good parts within the team. And then, of course, you have the fan sentiment. And this is one of the darker secrets of esports, but it's that actually fans do have a lot of say in how much a player is valued, and how much a player can rise to the top in a specific league, because maybe then they're more valued as a brand, and so therefore they get onto the better teams and such, because the better teams are more prestigious and things like that. So you have this idea from the fans, which they largely get from the broadcast, which is then going in generalities, as I said. So you have this regurgitated problem to where now fan sentiment becomes part of the problem too, and it destroys certain players that maybe should have gotten a second chance within the professional scene. And this really affects more of players and their brand than I think a lot of people think. And so when you look at some of the actual success stories from this and from players, looking good on a bad team, one of the players that you think to the forefront, at least within NALCS, is Lyra, right? He's one of the players that eluded the pitfall of sinking his career with a bad team when it came to Team Envious. That team was atrocious. They really couldn't get any wins on the board, but he ended up looking good because he was one of the junglers that had a really great early game, often got first blood a lot, and carried Team Envious towards the mid game. But then after mid game, it just kind of spiraled out of control, and it seemed like they couldn't transition his power into other parts of the team. But Lyra got more opportunities, right? Now he's on Clutch Gaming, and albeit he's not looking the greatest, but at least he's not looking like shit like before he did. But still, Lyra got a second chance, and this is one of those rare times to where you see a player look really good on a bad team. But I think he's fortunate because he was in a meta to where he could do that, and people could notice that very easily. The meta did him a lot of favors, but sometimes it doesn't favor people within that aren't within a hard carry position. And so suddenly, maybe if you're a tank player, or maybe if you're a support or someone that plays control mages, then suddenly you aren't in that driver's seat in order to hard carry a team, and it's actually not even really your responsibility to do that function. And so some players just kind of lucked out and or got unlucky, I guess, in terms of elevating their career in a mediocre team because the meta just simply didn't favor them. You could even say Froggen was one of these guys. He's been someone who has been largely doubted by fans since his Equifox days, right? And this was a team that did very poorly, and he was one of the stars on the team. And people criticized that, first of all, he's a veteran and he should be able to lead this team. And I think rightly so in some form and function of that. And also his style was a control mage. And so he often got a huge lead within lane, but it seemed like he didn't really do anything with his gold. But that in itself is just showing that, okay, this ruined Froggen's career and kind of tarnished it to a certain extent. And why the fuck do you think that he took a break for so long? Probably because he didn't get many great offers after that time. So he had to rebuild his brand back up. Now he's a very popular streamer, and now people want him on the team because of that aspect of his brand, right? But his brand did suffer a lot, and I think it's largely because of shit analysts and fans that don't even know what they're talking about. Shifter, going way back, is another major player that suffered from playing on a bad team. Back in his days in Dignitas, this team was pretty awful, largely because they had a jungler rotating system that really didn't pan out, and that one jungler came in and then suddenly was replaced, and so he had to function on learning these two different junglers and learning a completely largely different play style. And then also his bot lane was falling apart too, so it did him no favors in that regard. And so he suddenly started to play more and more of a safe style in order to try and get wins for his team, but ultimately it didn't really pan out. And one wonders if he just stuck with a more hard carry style and played more aggressive like he did in the beginning, then maybe his career would have actually been extended. But that didn't happen. He didn't look good on the bad team as far as the eye test of what many pundits or many analysts that would generally go with a false narrative would be led to believe. Bang. Now, currently, he is on a downward trend, and people are saying that, well, maybe he's not as great as he looks, or, and currently he's on 100 Thieves, of course, with Afromu, and you would think that this bot lane would be incredible, but it turns out not really. But the entire team has been falling apart. You have a mid laner who was pretty bad in Huhi, right? And he completely fell the fuck off, right? And then you had a jungler who really couldn't complement that style at all, or even play towards someday, as the entire bot lane was falling apart too because of Afromu, right? And so ADCs are in a particularly tough spot because they're attached to the hip of a support. So if the support is doing bad, then you're going to look bad, right? And you aren't going to be looking as impressive as a fucking, two-time world champion, right? So Bang is tied to this, and therefore it's kind of bringing his career down and down and down. And one begins to wonder if he went on a different team, suddenly maybe people would think that he's actually a great ADC and this was one of the best pickups that North America could ever get. And so this whole narrative of not looking into the nuance of how an actual player plays the game is a very big part of the problem, and why people think that certain players are bad, because I don't think Bang actually is playing that bad at all. I think he's actually a pretty fucking good ADC. Aside from his little aggressiveness that is missing, obviously, from the laning phase, and you can argue whether that is highly valued or not, depending upon the analyst that you talk to. I think it's pretty valuable. Mithy is another person whose career was stained, of course, with his time in TSM, and now he holds the weight of been on the team that TSM didn't make playoffs, right? The only iteration, the first iteration of that time that didn't make playoffs, right? Or didn't get to the finals even. So this stained his career, and people started calling him shit, and people didn't think that Mithy could even come back to the top again, and that maybe he lost his drive or whatever. And then he moved over to Origin, right? And with a team full of rookies and such. And suddenly now he's picking up the slack and making this team a really great team. And so wow, what do you know? Mithy is suddenly really great again. No, fuck that. He was good before. It's just people didn't realize, like, okay, maybe it's the entire team and how everything works together, and that is causing TSM to lose games. And I'm willing to admit that, yeah, Mithy actually didn't look super great, but I also didn't think that he looked like complete shit like people were saying and going to the extreme towards. Afromu's career has been tarnished, right? And you think of Afromu and it's just like, all right, well, with 100 Thieves, maybe he is in large part due to them looking like shit. And I think that's a pretty valid argument, especially considering that shot calling and just their whole cohesion as a unit, you would think lies on Afromu's feet. So I don't think he actually is included within this entire summary of that. I think he's in a different cog of his own, and I actually think he is partly responsible as to why a team looks bad and that he can't look good in the team because he just didn't play good, right? But if you look at another game such as CSGO, for instance, where individual skill expression is very high, I think this is one of those games to where it's actually easier to look good on a bad team, right? Like, we can look at Simple as the obvious answer to that, and that he is legit an elo hell, or at least he was for a very long time on Navi, but he was considered the best player in the world. It's like that never happens in League of Legends. You don't ever hear the best player in the world on a completely shitty team for a long amount of time. That never happens. I mean, Faker, yeah, he even took a dip with people saying that Rookie or Chovy or BDD were at his level or even better than him, all because of his performance, in 2018 and SKT's train wreck of an entire team. And that team only looked fucking good when Faker actually was able to do anything, right? So people even do that to the greatest player of all time within League of Legends. So why would you think that any other pro player is immune to this? I think it's a very large problem within the ecosystem of League of Legends itself. LoL has trended more towards, being more and more of a team game. And sure, with the recent meta, yes, there's a little bit more skill expression within the game, especially with the changes to the ward system and, removal of Tracker's Knife. There becomes more of isolated lanes and such to where you can express your own skill individually within laning phase specifically is a better mode of, showing skill expression within this game. But it's nowhere near the level of CSGO, where a single player can largely drag an entire team over the finish line multiple times in a row. Like, yeah, sure, maybe in League of Legends you can do that, a couple times here and there. But in games like CSGO, you can do that multiple times and prove that you are actually an incredible player capable of doing that, such as Simple, of course. So it's LoL is one of the major esports titles which has massive effects on a player's career if they join a shit lineup. Like, why do you think it took Froggen so long to join a team, right? Like, he had to get the fuck out of Echo Fox, build his brand back up through streaming, and then he could actually get on a good team again because he could leverage that branding as something that is valuable to a team other than his performance, which analysts or on Riot Broadcast thought he wasn't that great, or fans thought he wasn't that fucking great. Little do they fucking know. Now he's actually super, super good and viewed as a really great player, but I don't even think he really changed all that much in terms of skill at all. It was just the teammates fucking surrounding him. But whatever, we'll save that fucking narrative for later. And why do you think Forgiven is bidding his time as well too? He doesn't want to join a shit team, a team that can't win, because first, the guy's just crazy when it comes to competition and being incredibly competitive, incredibly driven. But it's also because you have to think that he doesn't want to join a shit team, and then his comeback is suddenly very lackluster, and people say he's fucking washed up and shit because his team is in 6th place, even though his skill hasn't changed from back in the day and he's still as good as he was. But people will go with the false narrative that, oh, Forgiven's washed up because his team isn't doing well. So it's so easy to fall out of the spotlight in League of Legends if you make a bad career move. And ironically, some players have been touted as like KDA players while their team loses. For instance, Froggen, of course, was cited as that, and most famously Jensen, of course, on his time on Cloud9. So sometimes you just can't fucking convince fans otherwise, and they'll run wild with their own false narratives, and that, along with shit analysts, are part of the problem of why looking good in a bad team is even more difficult than it should be within League of Legends.